They did what? They sent the Germans a message over their own frequency. That they were waiting for them to attack? Oh, that's funny. Wait. Hang on a second. That means that they're telling the Germans that they've cracked their codes and know their plans. Yeah, that's not very smart. Yeah, okay. March 26, 1943. Last week, there was an attempt on Adolf Hitler's life. This week comes another one. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Axis offensive in the USSR took Kharkov and Belgorod before coming to its end. In North Africa, an Allied offensive was just about to begin, and as I said, there was a failed attempt on Adolf Hitler's life. And as I also said, there is another one this week. On the 21st is a military museum display opening in Berlin. On display is a collection of captured Soviet weaponry. Before the opening to the public, though, Hitler, Hermann Goering, Heinrich Himmler, Karl Dönitz, and Wilhelm Keitel are to have a private viewing. The assassins are using the same explosives they tried to use last week. Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf, an intelligence liaison officer who is to be on duty at the exhibition, is going to be a human time bomb. He has the bomb in a long overcoat. The museum is unheated, so this is not suspicious. And he plans to start the 10-minute fuse just as Hitler is about to arrive. And just before the bomb goes off, he's going to run up to Hitler and grab him in a bear hug and blow them both up. However, in the interests of security, Hitler's scheduled visit time is cut down to 8 minutes. And when he arrives, he actually goes through the display in 2 minutes. So he's gone several minutes before the bomb is to blow. Gersdorf does manage to get out of there and defuse the bomb, but it is a pretty close thing. Check out our War Against Humanity series, also on this channel, for more background and more information about this conspiracy. There is plenty of action in the field this week, and a big chunk of that is in North Africa. The Allies are going on the offensive, as Bernard Montgomery's British 8th Army attacks the Mareth Line, the Axis defense position in southern Tunisia. Giovanni Messa's defenses are German and Italian units interspersed with each other. In the center, he has the German 90th Light Division across the highway to Gabes. On the coast is the Italian 20th Corps, the Giovanni Fascisti and Trieste divisions, backed by the Luftwaffe's 19th Flak Division and its 16 88mm batteries. In the west is the Italian 21st Corps, the La Spezia and Pistoia divisions, and at the far west, going up to the Matmata Hills, is the German 164th Light Division. He's got a lot of units to the rear as well, though. The Italian Sahara Group towards the Tabega Gap, the 1st Luftwaffe Brigade near the coast, the 15th Panzer Division to the west, and the 21st Panzers, where they can move either north against the Americans or south against the British. The 10th Panzers are even further north in reserve. This sounds like a pretty serious force. But every formation is currently below full strength. There are some 85,000 men here, 440 guns, and 140 tanks. In terms of infantry, the 8th Army advantage isn't so huge, but it has 692 guns and 743 tanks available. Montgomery has his 30th Corps on the forward zone, 50th Division along the coast, 51st in the center, and 7th Armored along the Medellin-Gabes Road. The 4th Indian Division is further south and a bit back. They all face the enemy across Wadi Zeus. Last week, on the night of the 16th, 50th Division began clearing mines in front of the Wadi and attacking enemy outposts there and making a route through the minefield and getting settled in front of Wadi Zigzag. From there, they'll do their big attack, which is the beginning of the main offensive. Now, this obviously alerts the enemy to that part of the line and that an attack is going to come. So there are also 2 diversions that same night. The 51st on the left is also crossing Wadi Zeus, and the 201st Guards Brigade is attacking between the wadis further south. The idea is that the strength and the diversity of these attacks will leave the enemy unable to determine the axis of the main attack. The 50th and 51st attacks achieve their objectives, the Guards don't. So at 11:15, the night of the 20th, units of the 50th Division begin the assault on the Mareth Line. The preliminary artillery barrage is huge, but the troop numbers actually attacking are quite small. only 2 battalions on a narrow front. Historians have for decades, the future, puzzled over why Monty attacked with so few men, supported by just 1 regiment of outdated and outgunned Valentine tanks in such a relatively tight area. He had brought his army almost 3,200 kilometers across North Africa without a single major setback, and was no doubt feeling in total command of the situation. He had great confidence in his own army and his own tactical genius, and viewed the enemy, especially the Italian defenders at Mareth, as being less capable. In simple terms, he was overconfident approaching the battle and thought that he could bring about a victory with a simple break-in and a massive rapid exploitation. He was not expecting to have to grind out a victory. Well, that might be the case, but the infantry do take their initial objectives at least. The lead tank, however, gets stuck and blocks the crossing point at Wadi Zigzag, and the rest of the regiment are stopped. This attracts heavy artillery fire, and though 4 Valentines do manage to make it up the opposite bank, the rest are pulled back to the assembly area. For the whole night, the attackers make a small bridgehead 1.5 kilometers wide and not even 1 deep, and it's all kind of a failure with just a few tanks and no anti-tank guns across to back up the exposed battalions. The story is the same the 21st, and though the rest of the Valentines get across, they destroy the ground to the point that no anti-tank guns can cross. The 22nd, Messe sends in the 15th Panzers to attack the bridgehead, retaking all lost strongpoints. With the bridgehead lost, Monty withdraws 8th Army that night, a major setback for 8th Army for the first time since El Alamein. Messe also brings up that day the 164th Light Division to reinforce against Bernard Freyberg's New Zealand Corps, who I talked a lot about last week, who are finally arriving through the Tobega Gap and facing the Italian Sahara Group, who have a pretty commanding position. Freyberg's attacks the 21st, they don't achieve much, but the evening of the 22nd, they do manage a small breakthrough, though they fail to exploit it the day of the 23rd with the beefed up defenses. So this flanking thrust is also a failure for Montgomery. So the morning of the 23rd, Montgomery comes up with a new plan. He sends the 1st Armored Division to meet up with the New Zealand Corps, along with Horrock's 10th Corps headquarters. The New Zealand Corps is then dissolved, with Freyberg back to commanding the 2nd New Zealand Division, and everything else coming under 10th Corps. They are to launch a major assault today, Operation Supercharge II, through the gap towards El Hama and Gabes. As it turns out, they can't get supporting artillery there by then with such short notice, so the Desert Air Force is going to support the ground troops with a low-flying blitz attack through the gap. The aircraft were to be guided by specialized ground controllers close to the front line who would be able to bring down devastating aerial bombardment on any individual target identified on the ground. It was the first time this type of control was used to vector in fighter bombers on a large scale. But what are the Axis doing during the second half of the week? Well, despite the success of the first half, Heeresgruppe Africa commander Hans-Jürgen von Arnim can see that eventually the Allies will break through. So on the 24th, he orders the Mareth Line given up. Both Messe and Luftwaffe boss Smiling Albert Kesselring are against this, but von Arnim does not budge. He calls for withdrawal to begin the 25th to the Wadi Akarit position and to take 3 days to complete it. Supercharge II begins as scheduled at 4 p.m., which you might think is an odd hour to begin an attack, but Montgomery wants the setting sun to blind the defenders. And so, as the armor and infantry move in, the fighter bombers come in waves of 30 planes every 15 minutes, hitting identified machine gun and artillery positions and tank clusters. The attack is relentless, and Phase 1 is complete by 6 p.m. The 1st Armored Division then begins Phase 2. Tonight, at 1 minute past midnight, the forward tanks head out for El Hama. If they can reach it and the road to Gabes, that would be curtains for the Axis forces on the Mareth Line. There is action elsewhere in Tunisia this week, though. George Patton's American advance last week to Gafsa and beyond has worried von Arnim, and so early this week, as an American attack beyond El Getar savages the Italians, he sends the 10th Panzer Division to attack the Americans. Patton has by then been asked to threaten the Axis flank by heading down the Gabes Highway. The forces meet the 23rd. Many of the relatively inexperienced American units fare badly over the course of the morning, but the U.S. 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion overlooks the road and at great cost drives the panzers off before the morning is over. They come back later in the afternoon. Radio intercepts say the attack will be at 4:45. At 4:15, U.S. 1st Division Commander Terry Allen has a message sent out over 10th Panzer radio frequency. "What the hell are you guys waiting for? We've been ready since 4. This might be bravado, and it is funny, but it also alerts the Germans to their lapses in security, and the 10th Panzer soon changed their codes. The British are quite angry with this development. What they are not angry with are the results of the battle. The American artillery just decimates the Germans. On the 25th, the 10th Panzers write they have just 26 serviceable tanks left, so it is a division in name only. The American army had won a signal victory, defeating a veteran German armored division that had terrorized opponents in Poland, France, Russia, and Tunisia. The first solid, indisputable defeat we inflicted on the Germans in the war, Omar Bradley called it. There is also American action further north this week, but I will cover that next week. For there is American action in the North Pacific on the 26th that needs covering this week. The Battle of the Komandorski Islands. This is a chance encounter in the Bering Sea. Well, chance and chance. The Americans are aware of Japanese plans to send a convoy to supply their troops in the Aleutians, but they don't have data on where and when. 2 cruisers and 4 destroyers under Admiral McMorris meet Admiral Hosagaya's 4 cruisers and 5 destroyers. They have a pretty traditional firefight, and the Japanese have 2 cruisers damaged, and the US 1 cruiser and 2 destroyers damaged. However, just when Hosagaya's numerical advantage is turning the battle, he withdraws. He doesn't realize how badly he's hurt the American cruiser, and he is very worried about an American air patrol appearing. The transports the Japanese ships are escorting head for home as soon as the battle begins, so the supply run fails. This is a meaningful strategic defeat for the Japanese, since this ends the Japanese supply runs to the Aleutians by surface ships, though they will continue by submarine, but those can't carry nearly as many supplies. Hosagaya is retired from active service after this failure of his. The Allies make a withdrawal of their own this week in Burma. Ord Wingate now has orders to stop his Chindits advancing and go back to India. He's lost like a third of his force so far, so he splits them up and they will make their way back. Most will reach base by early April. It is Theater Commander Archie Wavell who orders them back. They have messed with Japanese communications, cutting the Mandalay-Mayatkina Railway in over 25 places. The thing is, it was Wingates Crossing of the Irrawaddy last week that was his undoing, since their guerrilla campaign was pretty successful in the rainforest. Once over the river, Wingate's men found they were without protective cover on the hot, dusty plain, which was intersected by roads crawling with Japanese patrols. Advancing beyond the range of airdrops, the following weeks become a nightmarish ordeal as they fought thirst, disease, and hunger, in addition to an enemy unwilling to pursue them into the jungle, but now able to harry their columns in the open country. It is the Germans who've been withdrawing in the Soviet Union. Operation Buffalo is the name of the German retreat in the center of the front, and it has really shortened their defense lines. It's also given back to the Soviets 150 kilometers of the Moscow-Vyazma-Smolensk Railroad. On the 21st, the Soviets take Durovo, northeast of Smolensk, and on the 24th, they penetrate the outer defenses of Smolensk itself. The German losses during the winter campaign have been terrible. A reliable estimate puts it at over 1 million dead. The Russians claim the destruction or capture of 9,000 tanks, 20,000 guns, and 5,000 aircraft, as well as thousands of trucks. But Russian losses too have been serious. However, the Russian war potential is rising while the German is in decline. The arrival of the spring muds, though, has put a stop to a lot of the action on the Eastern Front. Or has it? As indicated by the official history of the Fifth Army, most Soviet accounts fall deafeningly silent about the heavy fighting that took place after the 23rd of March. Its account asserts the Fifth Army reached the Brikovo, Polebino, Teplianka, and Gordon line by the 23rd of March. Offensive action was halted along this line because of the Rasputitsa, the spring thaw. Both sides went over to the defense. However, this is not what is written, for example, by the Western Front's 31st Army and several others. For Stavka did order the Western Front to continue attacking the Axis forces even after their withdrawal was complete, and in spite of the new, shorter, and stronger German defense lines. But all of these assaults by the armies of the Western and Kalinin Front take place in terrible terrain and terrible weather conditions, and all fail to inflict much damage on the enemy, and all will end by the beginning of April. And there's another reason why they're not mentioned very much by the Soviets. German losses could not have amounted to more than a few thousand soldiers killed or wounded. On the other hand, by official Soviet calculation, the Kalinin and Western Front suffered 138,577 casualties in the operation, including 38,862 killed, captured, or missing. We saw at the very end of last week the Soviet directive creating the Kursk Front. But that situation changes already this week. On the 24th comes a directive liquidating the Kursk Front and forming an Orel Front. So the 60th and 38th Armies are to be transferred to the Central and Voronezh Fronts respectively, and the Orel Front will get the 61st Army from the Western Front and the 3rd Army from the Central Front. And then another directive will come out 2 days from now, renaming the Orel Front the Bryansk Front. I'll quote Glantz once again about this stuff. The process of reconfiguring and renaming the Red Army's operational fronts, although seemingly trivial, vividly underscored the Stavka's near-frantic efforts to reorder the strategic offensive configuration of its force into a force posture capable of conducting an effective strategic defense. If nothing else, it illustrated the scope of the battlefield setbacks suffered by the Red Army in February and March 1943. But they are still attacking further up north. The attacks by the Leningrad and Volkhov fronts that began at the end of last week continue now all week long. The former managed to nearly reach Sablino, but a counterattack by the Flanders Legion, volunteers from German-occupied Belgium, and a few Tiger tanks, drive the Soviets back to their jumping-off points, and there they remain the rest of the week. The Volkhov front attacks towards Maga, and over the first half of the week advances 3 or 4 kilometers on a 7-kilometer front. After that, they send in a mobile group in thunderstorms to try to cut the Maga-Kirishi Railroad, and this nearly succeeds, though the Germans do manage to reinforce and do manage to stop them. And the week comes to an end. A week of fighting in Burma, the North Pacific, the north and center of the Eastern Front, and in Tunisia. That's a lot of active war in spite of all the mud. And there is another attempt on Hitler's life. And think who is with them when it's supposed to happen. That's a lot of the heaviest hitters of the entire Nazi regime. You can't help but think that if all those men were indeed blown up and killed this week, then the future of Germany, and the future of the war, and the future of the world might have been very different indeed. So the Allies are fighting the Axis in Tunisia, but it wasn't that long ago, just early November, when Operation Torch was their invasion of northwestern Africa. And you can watch the episode where that kicks off right here. And a special thank you to our newest officers in the Time Ghost Army. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Larry Ross. It is thanks to people like Larry and the officers and the whole Time Ghost Army that we can keep tackling ever more ambitious historical projects. So join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com to make these episodes possible. And do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.